So, to finish us off, so to speak, we have J. Paul Neeley from YossarianLives. And J. Paul started his career at Unilever working in consumer products, and then moved into a world of service design, but more recently has done what he describes as working with emerging technology to design future products and services. Please welcome J. Paul.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I'm gonna share with you some ideas today about metaphorical search, and I'll mention a little bit just in terms of background, kind of where some of this work and the idea space came from. So as Matt mentioned, I've been working a lot with emerging technologies, in particular in a space called speculative design. It's also sometimes called design fiction or critical design. And it essentially is designers decoupling design from the demands of the near-term marketplace and then using it as a way to explore future products and services and not being predictive and what that future will look like, but rather using them to ask questions about technology. So what are the future implications, the social, cultural, and ethical implications of these technologies as a way to kind of start conversations? And so I came to the UK about 4 years ago and was studying in a design interactions course at the Royal College of Art. And it's a course dedicated to this sort of exploration, to speculative design. And we were, with one of my co-founders, Daniel Foster Smith, we're asking a lot of questions about the health and resilience of complex systems, some interesting kind of theoretical conversations. But one of them that we kind of hit on quite often was the dangers of singular ways of thinking about certain spaces and the value of diversity for the health of a system. That kind of led us to this particular space and this particular project with YossarianLives. So I'm going to do a bit of mind reading now. And when I ask each of you to think of internet search, just conjure up an image in your mind of what internet search is. I'm seeing smiles. And is there anyone in the room that did not think of this? Actually, honestly, is there anyone that did not think of this? Okay, a single Bing user that's maybe afraid to raise their hand. But this is what we think about when we think internet search, and it's a singular way of exploring the web. And it's incredibly valuable for certain types of queries and certain types of activities. But it's not the only way to explore the vastness of the internet. And actually, it also has some problems. And the particular problem that we're interested in is that it tells us what the world already knows. So if you think about the last time you used Google, for example, before you can even finish typing in your query, it's already returning the results of what everyone else has searched for. Right? We've heard these called junk food algorithms by Eli Parser and others. People are concerned about the world that they feed us. Instead of helping us kind of expand or grow in our understanding of a topic, they actually reinforce existing knowledge and collapse possibilities. And this is particularly problematic for certain types of, say, creative endeavors. If you're in the business of generating new ideas, this is a bit of a disaster because the more you use it, actually, the more you're like everyone else, the less creative you are in a way. And so we became very interested. You know, we don't actually want you to know what everyone else knows. We want you to generate new knowledge. And is it possible to use a search engine to kind of support that activity? So if you imagine kind of today's internet, this web of ideas and concepts, and current search will take your query and then return results that are closely related to it. And we take a different approach with our engine. So we understand your query, we understand the structural attributes and components of that concept, and then we look to return ideas from entirely different domains that share similar attributes. So what we're really interested in is this lateral connection between ideas, or a metaphorical connection between concepts. Often when we say metaphor, people's faces just glaze over. They're kind of having these flashbacks to their secondary school English teacher trying to explain the concept. But this is an audience that knows metaphor well, and we use it in so many of our communications. But as a quick refresher, take, for example, the statement, love is a river. Well, love is not a river, right? That's patently false. But when we understand it metaphorically, you have this flash of insight. Right? Okay, well, love ebbs and flows. It's ever-changing. It has a source. It's difficult to control. We were sharing this with a venture capitalist here in London. He turned to his partner and he said, "It's cold and dark." The metaphor sometimes, the interpretation sometimes tells us a lot about the individual. But in that instant, right, the attributes of river help us to think about love in a particular way. And these metaphors are incredibly powerful in that way. So a concrete example, and this comes from my background in healthcare service design. So I would often be asked to reimagine the emergency department of the future. And the more time, we do that search in Google or an existing search engine, and it returns what we already know about emergency departments as they exist today. And everything I learn about them actually makes me less valuable to the physician team that's asking me to help or support. And in this instance, this is where metaphor can actually be really, really powerful. So that same query in YossarianLives returns a metaphor, and in this case, a Formula One pit crew. I've already apologized to Rob. We'll have a McLaren photo in there for future presentations. Do you see the metaphor? So the broken patient is now the broken car, and we have a multidisciplinary team working to fix a problem. There's a sense of urgency. And all of the technologies, the processes, the roles of the Formula One pit crew help us to think about the emergency department in a new way. And actually, there are a number of hospitals here in London that have implemented processes from Formula One pit crews into their transfer of patients and in other parts of the hospital, and seen reduction in different types of error in the course of doing that. And actually, just last week, the metaphor kind of continues to be persuasive and pervasive in healthcare. Atul Gawande, Dr. Gawande, one of the kind of leading thinkers in U.S. healthcare, was suggesting that the role of the physician is moving from kind of cowboy to pit crew. So instead of this kind of lone ranger physician type, we now have this multidisciplinary team of nurses and other experts working on the patient. But so a whole shift in thinking in the industry from looking at another space. So who uses these? Well, almost any industry you look at, you can find great thinkers that have kind of utilized metaphor in their work, and they're everywhere as you begin to really understand what's going on in the space. And I'll just mention, one of our favorites down in the corner, James Dyson. And he's actually quite clear. You can kind of connect the metaphors in his work. For example, cyclone technology. So understanding the mechanics of this natural phenomenon, then translated into a physical product. And then even, the metaphor works so well, we continue to use that in the communication. So we call it cyclone technology. Or the Dyson ball, another example. Can a Hoover move through your home like a football on a pitch? But look at almost kind of any great thinker, and you'll see these metaphors play out in their work. A few kind of quotes on the power from Parkhurst: "Any supreme insight is metaphor." Aristotle suggested that the greatest thing by far is to be a master of metaphor. Quite a statement from one of the greatest thinkers. And finally, one of our favorites: the most profound social creativity consists in the invention and imposition of new radical metaphors. And you'll often find industries that are completely revolutionized by the imposition of a new metaphor, or you'll see industries that are suffering under old, kind of unworkable metaphors that continue to define the thinking in the particular space. So we're actually finding that anyone that derives value from new ideas, exploring metaphor in this way becomes quite interesting. So let me give you a few kind of more concrete examples. So let's say that we've been asked to search language, or that's a particular topic that we're exploring. A Google search of images will return something like this. So you can see things that we'd consider language, and again, it's a literal return. This is what we'd expect. The same search in YossarianLives, again returning a metaphor. So in this case, we've got kind of this string of images through the middle. You know, is language a structure, or is it a bridge or a network? And you begin to start thinking about language in a particular way. You know, is the Eiffel Tower a type of novel, if language, or the novel of language, that sort of thing. Another example, I'll share a few of these and hopefully they'll kind of come along, but search. Again, Google, kind of a singular perspective on what search is. But there are other ways to think about search, and this might be an interesting metaphor. So is search about hitting a target, or aiming, or pointing a gun, finding a target? Interestingly, there's no right metaphor, right? There are potentially hundreds or thousands of possible metaphorical targets, and so what we essentially kind of gather those metaphors and then allow the user to begin exploring those different ideas. Another example, science. Again, from Google. And again, we've got kind of this singular perspective. And if you imagine, if you're an art director, this isn't particularly helpful material, right? It's kind of cliche. It's what we already know. And you think about even some of the communication happening in science today, the efforts to get girls involved in science. And if the belief that science is only chemistry and physics and old men that kind of look like Albert Einstein, you know, it's a very narrow view of what actually science is. So metaphors for science, is science about a puzzle or a crossword or a maze, figuring something out? Another is science actually about the inner workings of something, or figuring out the insides, or how something functions. And we get quite excited actually when the project begins to suggest new metaphors, or things that were maybe possibly novel. So, you know, is science actually a seat of power, or an institution, or a type of governance? So each of those becomes quite interesting. And finally, on meaning. So I think with Google, for some reason, we get a lot of comics about the meaning of life. But again, reflections of meaning from YossarianLives, you know, is there maybe something about balance? So again, I'm showing you kind of snippets, but there are potentially a lot of different metaphors to begin exploring. One of the things that's interesting, we've found that images work really well because they demand that the individual first interpret the image to identify the metaphor. And what that does is it forces someone to kind of begin thinking through their own experience and what they kind of know of the world. And we find it allows for much kind of higher hit rate or insight rate as users are exploring with this. So it kind of becomes a brainstorming or a dialogue tool with the user generating new insights. One of the really interesting things about metaphor is that your ability to understand a metaphor varies based on your own experience. And we've come to call this the Stephen Fry problem. And so for those of you not familiar with Stephen Fry, or some of our guests across the Atlantic, Stephen Fry is a very well-known presenter and actor, intellectual, and he's kind of celebrated for his encyclopedic knowledge of everything. And the joke kind of goes, if we're all at a dinner party with Stephen, and you make a joke about some obscure 17th century philosopher, Stephen will laugh, and he'll crack up, and then he'll add some anecdote about the gentleman's mother. And the rest of us will just kind of nod, you know, and smile. And it's not that the connection wasn't dead on or very clever. It's just that we didn't have enough information or knowledge about the subject domains to make those connections. So it becomes one of the challenges in the work we're doing is to identify the right metaphors to return to the user. So for example, we can return one metaphor to one individual, and the person just dismisses it, you know, it's meaningless. And the same metaphor to another person actually has them almost in tears. It's overwhelming. I can't believe how creative this system is. So that individual variation becomes really interesting. The other kind of space that we've been exploring or working in is that of conceptual metaphor. And there are a lot of thinkers now that suggest that metaphor is actually how we process the world, that we actually think in metaphor. And I'll give you just a couple of examples. So when I say, for example, that I've had a rough day, if we look at your brain in a functional MRI scanner, as I share that phrase, the parts of your brain that handle actually tactile, sensorial information are firing. You're literally feeling roughness as I talk about that day. And we know, linguistically, I meant that kind of literally. Or it sounds literal. We don't think about that as a metaphor, but we actually physically respond to that type of phrase, which is amazing when you think about the resonance now that you can have with individuals as you communicate with metaphors. It works the reverse way as well. So, for example, if someone's holding a warm cup of coffee while they're talking to someone else, a stranger, and then asked about how the interaction went, they're more likely to refer to them as a very warm or nice person than if they're holding a cold cup of a drink of some kind. So again, the physicality of our space begins to change the way that we think. There's kind of some amazing overlapping. So I'll give you one more example of this, and kind of one of our favorites. So if I, for example, say to you, crime is a virus, and then I ask you about what we should do about crime, people tend to say, well, it's an ill our society faces. It's all about prevention. It's about finding a cure. It's looking for these kind of social interventions that we can fix things. If I tell you that crime is a beast, and then I ask you what we should do about crime, people start talking about, it's a battle. It's something we really have to tame. We need more police. We need more prisons, and it's a fight. But then if you ask people about this afterwards, they're completely unaware that the single word metaphor actually played any role in their kind of problem solving or thinking through of that issue. And so these metaphors, we know this as, and you'll know this as marketers, are really, really powerful. But the ability for single word metaphors to frame cognition in that way is incredibly powerful. And so it's actually, we're realizing there's some opportunities with some of the technology that we've developed to begin exploring this. So I'll give you one example. We trained the early system on a British corpus. So it was reading a lot of Jane Austen and great British literature. And I got a call from Dan late one night, and he's like, we've done it. We've done it. And he had searched for heaven, and it had returned cup of tea. And it's like, this is the answer. And again, you share that with any Brit, and there's an immediate smile. They literally feel what heaven is like. They know that sensation of a nice cup of tea. But to an American, I'm sorry, it just doesn't quite do the trick. But actually, that's one of the big opportunities, is there are social and cultural variations in understandings of a particular metaphor. And so we're realizing there's a big opportunity to begin parsing different language sets, different readerships, and begin to understand what metaphors are at play with different audiences, allowing you to kind of connect with them in unique ways. So we're quite excited about that. So one of the interesting discussions we've had quite a bit is with a lot of creatives in this space, and several times we've had these moments where they kind of go ghost white as they realize some of the implications of what we're looking at, and they say, well, this is human creativity. This is the one thing that I do that the computer's not supposed to be able to do, and you're now doing that thing. And but we don't like to think about it in that way. We generally talk about it as augmented creativity. So the individual's ability to generate these sort of lateral connections, again, is based on their own experience. And in a way that the algorithm has just seen more of the world. So it's able to bring up potential connections or lateral connections or metaphors that the individual hasn't thought of. There's still a huge amount of work, though, in the selection of the appropriate metaphor. There's a lot of nuance with the content on say, the messaging side, and also the context of the audience side to be considered. But we do see an opportunity to do more than just serendipity in our attempts at ideas, but to actually use these types of technologies to augment creativity in this way. So that's hopefully a few ideas and maybe some insight on this particular project. And I guess if there are takeaways, my hope is that it just kind of to refresh thinking about metaphor, and as metaphor plays out and works in your different communications and the spaces that you're working in, to kind of understand that, and also to suggest that there's a lot of new science kind of happening around metaphor and new technologies to begin allowing us to explore this in different ways. And I think it quite an exciting space then for metaphor moving forward. So hopefully that inspires some potential interest or applications or insight in your own practices that might be interesting. So thank you very much.